Welcome back to the Mining Pod. Colin's off this week. It's just me, joined by James and Will of Advanced Crypto Systems, or ACS, to discuss, Bitcoin mining. In this show, we go through a lot of different topics, including like if you want to mine Bitcoin and just buy Bitcoin, how should you think about it? As two people who kind of went through the ringer from 2017 onwards, they offer some good insights into how to get into Bitcoin mining in that small to medium-sized miner route that some people like to start investing in. We also go through the repair side of the business a little bit, how some of these older gen units are actually holding up. If you're going to buy old gen units, what should you purchase? And then where are some common failure points for ASICs? And lastly, we talk about energy. We have to talk about energy. It's a mining podcast, and how you can use different techniques to bring more money in, more revenue in for your Bitcoin mine. So thank you to James and Will for jumping on the show. Before we join the show, quick word from our sponsors.
Are you a retail or institutional investor interested in Bitcoin mining companies? The Miner Mag brings you free data and analysis from all major NASDAQ-listed Bitcoin mining operations to know who stands out. Check out visualized metrics and data-dependent stories at theminermag.com. Thanks for listening to the Mining Pod. Want more? Subscribe to our main feed on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you get your podcasts for another weekly show on Bitcoin stocks. And check out our newsletter at miningpod.blockspace.media today.
Hey, welcome back to the Mining Pod. On today's show, we're joined by ACS. We have James and Will joining us today. Guys, welcome to the show. We're talking about private mining, which we've done a lot of pubcos recently, so I'm kind of excited to get back into actual Bitcoin mining, if you will, where you guys have to fight against the forces of nature, fight against difficulty, and secure Bitcoin on your own terms, not with the help of massive ATMs or public markets. So welcome both of you guys to the show.
Thanks for having us.
So we'll do a quick bio since you guys have never been on before. And then just for listeners, the point of this show is just to talk about ways of securing revenue as a smaller Bitcoin miner. We're talking to people who are 10 to 25 megawatts in size. And for those who are kind of newer to Bitcoin mining, we'll detail what that exactly means. But this is on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of hash rate for most miners these days, which itself is kind of crazy if you think about it. That 10 or 20 megawatt mine used to be, a mega mine. Now it's not. So, James, I'll throw it to you first, and then to Will.
Sure. Okay. Well, James Scaggs, CEO at ACS. We are a Nets repair and operations company. Got involved in the Bitcoin space after reading the Bitcoin Standard back in 21, and met Will and convinced him to ship 8 pallets of T17s to my garage in Prosper, Texas. So now we're basically a team of 30 and making it through the crypto winter, ready for the bull market, and just happy to be on the show.
Well, I'm Will Middleton. I represent ACS. I was a co-founder with James, and I've been in the mining space since 2017. Got in, actually, I would say late 2016. Started mining with GPUs, the evil coin, and then I switched over to Bitcoin here at the end of 2017, and have been Bitcoin kind of ever since. And I operate a 5 megawatt facility, as well as assist with ACS operations.
Awesome. So again, we're talking about that 10 to 20 megawatt size Bitcoin miner. James, I'll throw it to you first. Can you give us some data on what that means for someone? I always try to tell people one Bitcoin ASIC is equivalent of a house running as maybe an example, but that's probably not generally or specifically true, but I think it can help people understand how much power these things draw. But how big is 10 to 20 megawatts? What kind of miners are we talking about here that you guys help service?
Well, we're kind of currently dealing with a lot of the older generation stuff still because it's out of warranty. And so that's our core business, is a secondary market there. So, you're talking about 3 kW, right, for a J Pro. So 300 units a megawatt-ish. So 3,000 units for 10 megs. It's a, nice size operation. I know it pales in comparison to some of the giant mega farms, but when I got started, a megawatt, it was a lot to me, right? And so I guess the longer you're in the space, the more you get used to these big sites.
And like, just for listeners who, because we do have some CoinDesk listeners who tune in, how big would that be, like to a residential neighborhood or to like an industrial user of energy? Will, you can chime in there too if you have a good example. Again, like I always think of when I made my own like mini mine at my house a few years ago. It was like last bull cycle. I had 2 S19s, and I'd say like one of them was equivalent to like the draw of the power on the house itself. And so we basically kind of had like 2 houses to the grid there. But that's probably not like specifically true, but I'd be curious what you guys kind of use.
So, I think a lot of these Bitcoin mines are in somewhat remote areas. But just to give you an example of kind of our operation, we're a 5 megawatt facility in a county of about 200,000 people. And we are the second largest power user in the county on about an acre. And so it's very, very dense. Yeah, so I mean, if you're looking at a 10 to 20 megawatt facility, right, you're certainly the largest power user by far in terms of total, megawatt hours used for like that particular grid. But when people drive by and they see like one of these substations, that a typical utility would have with a couple transformers in it, a 10 to 25 megawatt facility is going to take up 50 to about 100% of that substation.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's super helpful. So let's go through like a little bit more of what you guys offer. So you have the crypto repair side, which mostly is dealing with like repairing hash boards, form factors, probably swapping control boards. So for people not familiar with Bitcoin mining, these are like the various parts that make up a Bitcoin ASIC, Bitcoin miner. And then do you guys offer anything else out there when it comes to like repairs or services for like transformers or containers or like putting stuff into substations?
Yeah. So, I mean, we are not electricians, but one thing I love about the space is everybody seems to have like a DIY mentality. So we've picked up, some of the skills that are needed to do things like basic maintenance on containers. So air containers, to be changing out belts on fans, hot aisle containment, specifically around network switches. Also getting our hands, dirty with hydro systems now. So going into the colder months, adding glycol into the hydro system so that we don't experience freezing. And basically, we are kind of doing everything on the miner infrastructure side, except for the electrical itself. So we don't, we can repair PDUs, we can install PDUs, but we will work with a subcontractor to actually do the electrical aspect of that.
Awesome. Okay. So your bread and butter is mostly on the ASIC repair side. And then Will, you've told me a little bit about in DMs how you guys are, building up a new facility here soon. But tell me a little bit about like that revenue side for both of you guys, like where you're working on both repair and then also working on specific sites. Will, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah. So on specific sites, so this would be outside of this is kind of outside of ACS, right?
Mm-hmm.
My personal experience. I think typically miners are going to want, if you're at this kind of smaller scale, a 10 megawatt site, at least the numbers that we've been running through, is going to cost, around $15 million if you're putting all your own equipment in there, right? Yeah. Newer gen equipment, plus including all the infrastructure, utility deposits, et cetera. That's a pretty big lift for a smaller private company. If you get to 25 megawatts, right? 20 megawatts, you double that. And then, the majority of that is going to be in the actual machines. In order to get, there's a difference between like if you have an existing operation where the infrastructure is paid off, then, you can like kind of speculate with some of the older gen equipment. You're not actually looking for like that same return on the infrastructure. But and so that might put you in a different place, right, than a newer operation that really needs a return on the infrastructure as well as on the equipment, right? And so they can't, you know, like they can't use kind of the older gen stuff. And so there's a mixture, right? There's a huge mixture of that in the market. Obviously, at the beginning of every bull run, there's lots of new operations, and so there's people there to kind of suck up the new equipment, and then you have these older operations, right, that would enlist services of ACS and elsewhere to say, hey, how do we make the most efficient use of this older the older machines, right, in order to get like a really good return based on the machines themselves, and maybe not so much on the infrastructure, during that kind of first 3 years or so. If you're a newer operation, I think you really want like a core based customer, right, that's going to fill up a decent portion of your facility kind of hosting. And then you can do your own proprietary mining, in addition to that, right? That's the one I see kind of the best model working for the smaller facilities. You get somebody who wants to buy 80% of the machines, you stick them in your facility, you take the other 20%, you buy, the best gear you possibly can with the money that you have, right? And you go from there.
Yeah. So we've had a few people on the show who have definitely talked to that model as well, where you form some sort of JV with a capital partner who can, bring in these ASICs, and in the playbook there is often run them for like 12 months, 18 months, and then flip them ideally at the highest price you can at the time, which can be so variable. Luckily, ASIC prices have been pretty static last 2 years, but it'd be harder for them to go lower. We'll find out. But
I was talking to somebody about this the other day, and they were hating on the mining sector, and we were talking about the different models, and the thought came up of like, hey, you can like buy these machines before the market rips and then sell them 2 years later or a year and a half later. The problem is like at that point in time, those machines are just making bank in terms of your cash flow. Like, yes, the price has gone up, but like, you have two problems at that point. Is one is what do you fill it with, right? What do you backfill it with? And maybe that's a customer, or maybe it's like older machines that you've just like, I don't know, kept in the warehouse, just doing nothing but, depreciating in value. But the other thing is like, when you buy a machine for $1,000, right, and then or buy it for $5,000, and then it's making, I don't know. I mean, what were these things making back in the day? They were making quite a bit, right? I mean, they were making enough to like pay themselves off in 3 months, sort of thing. And so, do you really have the, I guess, the discipline to sell at that point in time, right? It's the same problem that everyone has of like, well, you just buy Bitcoin when it's 50, you sell it when it's 50, right? Who knows, man? It could go to 100.
Today's show is brought to you by Digital Shovel. Digital Shovel is a leading manufacturer of modular mining pods as well as PDUs and switchgears. Unlike many other competitors, their product is designed and manufactured in North America with a complete UL inspection on the entire unit, not just individual components. Additionally, Digital Shovel is one of the most vertically integrated manufacturers of over 75,000 square feet of sheet metal shop, SMT and wave solder PCB assembly, as well as final assembly all under one roof in Toronto, Canada. Their price point leads the industry when compared to products with rates as low as $69,000 per megawatt for a complete data center with Smart PDUs and Switchgears. To learn more, visit digitalshovel.com.
It is hard to time the ASIC sell. So that's something that I literally was talking about this with an operator last week, where a lot of people play the game wrong, where they keep an ASIC until the end of its life cycle. They purchase it and they're trying to ROI on that ASIC purchase just with the mined Bitcoin, instead of using the fact that you can sell that ASIC to someone else and recoup some of your payment there immediately. And then you have the mined Bitcoin there as well. And that allows you to cycle into new ASICs, cycle into different infrastructure, diversify into different lines of business. So there's certainly more ways to play. But James, you made an important point there. Like, it's really hard to know when to sell. And sometimes when you have an asset on the books, you don't really want to let go of it because psychologically you're like holding on to it. So there's a trading aspect to Bitcoin mining a lot of people don't think about. I like that we're kind of riffing on this subject though, because I do think it's really important right now with where ASIC prices are at, which is namely flat while Bitcoin price is going up. Hash price has been going up. And for listeners who aren't super familiar with this, and we talk about this probably every week on the mining pod, definitely every week on the mining pod, hash price is sort of that revenue metric that miners use and gives us a good information on how much miners are actually making. And only recently have we crossed back over to that pre-halvening level for hash price. It's been very depressed since then. Maybe we'll see ASIC prices start to respond to increased hash price because we typically see ASIC prices start elevating as people know they can make more money mining, which intuitively follows. Do you guys have a gut check based on being in the space right now for repairs and for these smaller mines where pricing is at? Maybe even just a gut check just based on like euphoria or those animal spirits. James, I'll throw it to you.
As far as the market goes for the ASICs, the used gear, we're processing a lot of used equipment. I was rather surprised to see so much volume moving out of the country, actually. So one of the services we provide is a DOA verification service. So if you're buying thousands of ASICs and you have 7 days to check them all out in order to claim your warranty, you need to be prompt about it, and otherwise you're gonna not be able to get reimbursed. And so we processed a load of like 8,000 units for a large broker, and the majority of those left the country. And we're seeing the prices at the time. The acquisition price on that load was like $1.80 a terahash, and this was back like September, October, and the units were selling in the 220 to 260 range. And then we got the run up, and immediately, one thing I thought was interesting, it's like the owner of the assets actually stopped selling them. They were still sitting on a few thousand, and they wanted to wait and let the price run up, and I guess kind of create a bit of a shock on the supply. And the prices then leveled up to I'm seeing them at 350 a terahash now for J Pros. That's a pretty big increase, and I'm used to seeing about a 2-week lag. So typically I see the Bitcoin price goes up, the hash price needs to respond as well, but generally it's about 2 weeks on the upside. On the downside, with the prices dropping, then they typically don't respond quite as fast, and it makes it difficult to, if you're in the secondary market, to basically buy and sell ASICs when the price is fluctuating so much. The price of the ASICs can change overnight. It's kind of hard to like lock in deals, and I feel like that's a little bit something the industry is kind of missing, where you should be able to kind of lock in a price for the ASIC until Bitcoin exceeds like this other price. So I know I've seen deals done like that, but there's sort of no standard out there that I know of. But that's my take on it.
Will, any thoughts on that as well?
Having been in the industry for quite a while, I think about like how it's matured over the past 7 years, and like kind of what new maturity growth like the industry should have. And certainly like locking in sort of ranges for buying secondary equipment shows that we are certainly getting more mature as an industry, even at the smaller sort of mine level. And, with Luxor's hash rate futures, right, to give them a plug. And I think that's all needed, right, and something that is going to help us level up as a competitive industry globally. But, as James mentioned, we were surprised about how many machines were going abroad. I think you see this sort of narrative popping up in the public miners, how, some of them are like, maybe neutral on Bitcoin, but like really long on, hey, we just have energy infrastructure and we're trying to monetize it however we possibly can. Or you see, really big operations in Texas moving like into cities, right? Instead of initially away from cities in order to like get higher rebates, right? When they curtail, it's very much, this industry very much goes hand in hand with the energy industry. And I think people are starting to figure that out, which is great. I think, right? I think it helps the long-term security of Bitcoin. Like the closer we can be to the energy industry, the healthier the network and Bitcoin is going to be globally, for a very, very long time. But yeah, I think one thing that ACS really helps with is continuing to monetize your energy infrastructure and contracts that you have, right, at a lower sort of capex deployment than you might otherwise have to make, like raising a lot of new funds and buying a whole lot of new equipment.
Can you speak to that a little bit more? How you guys do that in practice?
Well, I think it's just by keeping this older equipment online longer, right? And so, James, you should probably talk about this, like the problems that some of these older equipment might show, having been in operation for several years in various operating conditions.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is to make sure the equipment's not corroded, right? So, obvious corrosion is obvious, but there is like less obvious corrosion or early signs of corrosion. And so you'll see rust on the fan grills, right? That's an obvious sign. You might see oxidation on the temp sensors, but if it starts getting underneath the heat sinks onto the ASICs themselves, you're basically getting into an area where the equipment, if it does work, is sort of hanging by a thread. Okay, so that type of equipment is something we would suggest to steer clear from. But if you can identify loads that are out there that are free from corrosion, then we can put the equipment through a process to sort of refurbish it. And one like step that we do in that process is thermal paste reapplication. So, each ASIC has its own dollop of thermal paste as it comes from the factory. And these things have been in the field for, let's say, 3 years now. It dries out. So we have a process with robots where we can essentially remove the heat sinks, clean the hash boards, and then reapply an upgraded thermal paste. And this has been a very effective way to buy low capex miners and essentially have them run like new. So if you have a cheap enough power, and you're looking for a way to ROI quickly, there are still good deals out there for both the J Pros and the M30 series.
Okay, so this is another cool part of like what we were just talking about a second ago. Is like if you are in that lower capital mode where you're coming to Bitcoin mining or have been Bitcoin mining for a little bit, and you are the one purchasing those pallets of used miners, this can be a way of extending the life cycle of an ASIC. I'm curious, like, we always have the S9 meme, right? With the AK-47 of Bitcoin mining, they don't die. What do you guys think about S19s or like any of the S19 models? Which ones are still chugging along? Certainly some of them are actually back and profitable right now. We'll see how long that lasts. Fingers crossed it lasts for a while, but are they holding up pretty well from your guys' perspective, or what parts need to be fixed?
I'll go first. So the pros are S19 Pro 110. Those things are tanks, and we like them a lot.
Yeah.
The J Pros, the green boards, the PCB boards, right? So it comes in two versions. Originally, they were manufacturing with PCB boards. Then they moved to the aluminum backed boards. And they removed the PIC chip and the MOSFETs, which was some hardware level features that were designed to prevent the board from overheating in the event of a single board going down. And so basically, we would say steer clear from the aluminum backed boards from the aspect of maintainability and repairability, because those boards typically fail in a way that we call like a catastrophic failure, right? It's like it's no longer economically viable to repair it because there are multiple domains of chips that are burnt. The original like vanilla S19, 90, 95T, they're green, they're PCB. So from that perspective, they are, that's going in their favor, but they've been in the field like the longest, and they are of pretty much like the worst efficiency of that set. And so they kind of like don't make money, at least on most sites here in the States. And that's what I think a lot of this equipment is going overseas, because even the sites that are getting like, an oil and gas site, right, that may be getting 2 cents, 3 cents all in with the generator maintenance and all of that. They don't want to put a machine that is, at like 30 watts of terahash, only at like 90 T. They would much rather get something that's 110 or get some Watts miners. So those are the units that we like on the Vitmain side. On the micro BT side, the M30s are tanks, but one drawback to them is there's so many versions of the hatch boards within a given model, right? M30S++ may have 8, 10 plus different versions of hash boards, and those versions cannot be like swapped between miners. So it makes like consolidation a giant pain, and for that reason, we don't necessarily like them. But they are, I'd say, in general, more robust. So we see a lot of the micro BT stuff going out in the oil and gas sites where, they're going to be pretty remote. Maybe a lot of dust out in West Texas.
It's interesting because the green boards, we also went the S19Ks, and this is getting really specific for those who are not really involved with Bitcoin mining. Hopefully we're not losing them, but we'll briefly touch on this, and then I want to go back to some revenue structures. But for some of the Bitmain models, like you saw both the aluminum board and the green backboard is what I always call it. And we've seen different longevities on those. And so, yeah, like the design decisions for these things certainly has implications. And if you are purchasing a pallet of units, you really got to know what you're purchasing. Otherwise, like you could have a really bad time. Going forward, though, like they're mostly using aluminum, right, for like most units at this point. So, like, how have we seen, or how have you guys seen, like S21s hold up on the repair side of things since they're also doing aluminum?
So I'll just speak anecdotally on what we've seen so far. It hasn't been the greatest based on what, my expectations were. Typically, the failures that we're seeing are related to the thermal paste. So it's a newer unit. You would expect the thermal paste to be fresh. So I don't know exactly what's causing that, but, keep in mind, we've probably worked on, less than 100 of these things at this point, right? So we'll have more feedback when it starts getting out of warranty. But in general, I think the design of the board when it comes to the 21 series is suffering from some of the design flaws that we saw with the XP and a lot of the other like no pick, no MOSFET boards.
In the competitive world of Bitcoin mining, one name stands out: CleanSpark, America's Bitcoin miner. At CleanSpark, efficiency isn't just a goal, it's our standard. Our sophisticated facilities are built and led by expert teams who care about Bitcoin and the communities we work in. Scale, we've mastered it. Our large-scale operations have set us apart in the industry as examples of community-oriented building. Our track record speaks for itself. We navigate the complexities of the new economy with precision and with skill, continuously achieving operational milestones. Curious about how we do it? We invite you to discover the story behind CleanSpark's success at cleanspark.com.
It's not uncommon that I get a DM on LinkedIn or Twitter or Telegram. Someone finds my email and hits me up about how to get going in Bitcoin mining when you do have some capital and you do want to mine Bitcoin as opposed to buying Bitcoin. And the option there is like, go buy Bitcoin in size for your retirement account or like IBIT or something like that. Or if you're really like Bitcoin mine pilled, you don't want to buy any of the pubcos and you're like, okay, I can go hosting or I can mine myself. And a decent amount of people do this every cycle. I mean, I assume that you guys were kind of those people, it seems like a few years ago, where you're like, yeah, I want to try to jump in. Unfortunately, a lot of people lose their shirts this way as well. So I'd be curious to know, like, when you are looking at this, what are some initial things you tell to somebody who is interested in getting going in Bitcoin mining this cycle? And then after that, I'll have some follow-up questions around like energy strategies, finding substations, things like that. Will, I'll throw it to you first.
It's interesting. My second operation that I had, I went from like a very small operation just in a home in 2017. Second operation, we moved out to a commercial facility. And the power rate there was like 7 cents, which is kind of standard for, I don't know, regulated market, commercial, big power user. Currently, I'm offering my customers, while their rate kind of fluctuates month to month based on like a fuel charge that changes month to month, they're not paying 7 cents, right? Like as hosting customers of our facility. And so it's like, I would certainly caution people from like going out and trying to find unless you're in a market where you can really play the energy market like Texas, I would certainly caution people about going out and like getting some flex space in a warehouse and setting up a, 2 to 5 megawatt sort of Bitcoin mining facility. You're going to lose your shirt, right? It's hard enough for the people in the space that have 6 to 7 cent power, right? That have a, 5 to 15 megawatt, facility out in the Texas desert, to make enough of a margin to justify doing the whole operation in the first place, right? So the other problem with this is, I have been thinking about this as Bitcoin has just run up here in the past month. There comes a point in time where if you're looking at a model to mine Bitcoin to make $1 return, meaning like you're going to sell it all and just pocket the dollars, I'm not sure that makes sense, right? Like I'm not sure it makes sense at all. Now, if you're going to mine Bitcoin to pocket the Bitcoin and hold it, yeah, like you can make that model work, right? It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to make it work though, if like you're trying to get $1 return. And so I don't know. I think we're kind of in a cycle where the mindset there is going to shift, right? Unless fees like really pick up, right? Unless the fee like amount compared to the block subsidy really picks up, like it's going to be hard to justify a model trying to get like $1 return.
Yeah.
So
I would piggyback on that. Like what the like about this space is that it, like I mentioned, it's very deep DIY oriented. And that is good, but it comes with like everybody kind of making the same mistakes over and over again. Like we deal with a lot of different sites, and when you're just trying to get started, like you're talking about here, a new audience that is trying to basically get into Bitcoin mining, it's doable, right? You can watch the videos that are out there and you can talk to people and get the feedback. But typically the mistakes that are made, whether it's in air immersion or hydro, like they're the same mistakes that other people have already made. And I think you've got to plan for downtime. Most people don't put downtime in their model, and most people are not putting like the network, like hash rate growth. They're not even projecting that. So those are two things where I would just say, if you're looking at getting into Bitcoin mining for the first time, you need to make sure your model calculates for some downtime, because you're not going to have 100% uptime on your ASICs, and the network's going to grow. And I like Will's comment that if you're gonna mine Bitcoin for the Bitcoin, great. I think it's a great play. If you're gonna try to mine Bitcoin to sell it and get dollars, it's tough. I mean, it is not easy. And if you make some missteps, right, and you let your equipment get corroded, or you let your pipes freeze in your system, right, like boom, your whole investment can just kind of blow up right there in your face. So one of the things that we've seen this happen, and one of the things that we've started offering to kind of, we're actually looking for, people like that to kind of partner with, right? Because we have an operations team as well as doing the repairs. But one thing that we've done with these sites that are running this older generation equipment is, we'll refresh it, we'll refurb it and get it up to like our standards. But we're offering like a product where it's a flat rate per month, and it includes not just the ops and the remote monitoring, but it's like all your parts are paid for, all your repairs are covered, right? So it's like everything from the ASIC perspective, you're essentially kind of guaranteed that it's going to be fully hashing, right? And that's a fixed cost approach. I think that's a great model, and you can kind of outsource that risk to a service provider. And I think that's a smarter play. And then as you get bigger, obviously, maybe it makes more sense to try to bring it in-house, but to just try to keep it all in-house and do it from scratch, watching YouTube videos, it's a tough play.
It is tough. I think that dream has quickly faded, which maybe there's a whole other conversation around network decentralization, which we can have another day.
Yeah.
So one thing go ahead, Will.
So you were getting to a point earlier about like, finding power and getting started and substations and whatnot. I think this is what I learned after my second Bitcoin mine that I had failed, right? Which was get your cost of power down, right? Doesn't matter how you do it, like get the cost of power down. And so, if you think you're gonna make it, like going and taking a commercial rate somewhere, like don't care how good your gear is, right? You're probably not gonna make it long term, right? And so like you've got to get your cost of power down. Now you can time the market perfectly, right? I would advise everyone to do that. If you can time the market perfectly, you should definitely time the market perfectly. But for the rest of us that don't time the market perfectly, you've got to get your cost of power down. The big publicly traded companies are doing this, right? They're finding every nook and cranny that they can to save money on their cost of power, right? They're doing curtailment programs, they're doing rebate programs, they're doing whatever they possibly can. They're buying energy at $40 a megawatt hour 10 years out into the future, and then selling it back to the grid when it goes to $2,000 a megawatt hour, right, at some like specific points in the summer. And so, I think that in order to have a profitable operation, you've got to look at it from, okay, what is my cost of power? And then how much revenue per megawatt hour am I bringing in with the ASICs that I have, right? And then what's the return? And so, fundamentally, this industry is getting tied to the energy markets, right?
Yeah.
It has been for some time, right? Maybe a handful of years, but it's there, right? And it's there it's even getting there, for the AI space, right?
Yeah.
Starting to say, you know what? If it means we can get online, yeah, sure, we'll do the curtailment, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to run 100% of the time, right? And so it's all about like, what is your cost of power and is it available?
Yeah.
So like you got to focus on those opportunities. I wouldn't worry so much about your uptime not being 100%, right? I'd worry about like, well, can I maintain healthy margins no matter the state of the Bitcoin mining market?
And this is to your point about like off-peak hour mining, right? I think we're talking and chat about this. Can you explain that concept a little bit?
Yeah. So, in some, in Texas, this is interesting in that like the rates fluctuate day to day, and they fluctuate by the hour, right? In some circumstances. And then if you get higher up in the stack, right? So if you're, actually buying power directly from an ISO, right? And there's like several ISOs across the US, they also have sort of like hourly pricing, right? And you can play like the sort of market. You got to be pretty large to subscribe to an ISO. But basically the utilities have these time of use rates, even in the regulated markets. And those time of use rates incentivize you to run during the off-peak time period. And historically, where this comes from is that you would have a lot of these coal-fired boilers in the US, and it would actually cost a significant amount of money to turn off a boiler, right? They can't just like keep the power on if no one's using it, right? So they have to like turn these boilers down. And let's say it costs $500,000 to turn the boiler off, right? And $500,000 to turn it back on. What the energy markets did, very similar to like kind of how wind does it in West Texas, they will just pay, right? Like the grid in order to like keep the thing on because it costs too much to turn it off and on. And so a lot of these time of use rates are, structured in a way that incentivize you to use power like during those off times. Some of this stuff might be going away, right, in the next couple of years or 10 years or whatever, because people see this like a loophole, right? The industry's taking advantage of. They weren't really designed in mind for like a customer as a heavy user as Bitcoin mining is or AI is. Like you use 100% of a contract during the off-peak times and then to shut off, right? Like it was mainly for like manufacturing clients. They were like, hey, if you could just like run your heavy power shifts, but during the off times and like the light kind of power shifts during the on times, right? Then like maybe you can creatively reduce your power cost.
Yeah.
And so these rates weren't really designed for our industry in mind. Now it takes a long time for the utilities to change, and maybe that's a benefit for us in this aspect. But yeah, I think that is certainly something to look into. But again, like like if you're in, you could be in like South Carolina, off-peak times, and like your uptime is only 65%, right? So like if you're doing that model, you're not buying you're not buying like S21 Pros, right? You're buying S19s, right? You're purely saying, you know what? I can build the infrastructure cheap. I could buy these low CapEx, older generation miners. I can get a really good power price, and then I can take the spread, right? And so I'm gonna use all these older generation equipment machines, right? Let's pick them up now, deploy them, make the spread on the power. That's it, right? That's the model. It's not really like, hey, let's buy the brand new fanciest stuff. It is pure like, what do they call them in Texas? Wildcatters, right?
Yeah.
They're out there just like, dude, I'm just picking up like pennies wherever I can, right? We're figuring out how to like make it work, and we are clean. We are like down and dirty and cutthroat, but we're going to make money, right?
Yeah.
And so like, there's going to be a portion of the mining industry that's going to do that, right?
Yeah.
We're just going to say, where can I get the margin? Like we'll do whatever, right? Where can we get the margin? And then there'll be new entrants that'll say, I'm going to build 100 megawatts and we're going to buy, 30,000 ASICs, and, they're all going to be brand new from the manufacturer. And that's great, right? I love that. Please bring that supply here, because in 4 years, we'll be picking that off. Off you, whether you go bankrupt or not, right? We'll be picking it off you for pennies, or 10 cents on the dollar, 20 cents on the dollar, right? And then running them for the next 6 to 7 years.
James, any follow up on that as well before we close out here?
Well, just, I don't know. One question I had, I guess, for you guys is I see a lot of people that when they're going to upgrade their fleets, right,
Yeah.
they're selling their miners to get capital and then they're upgrading, right? But it just seems like the better play is to like unplug your old miners, right? Buy the new ones while they're cheap, right? Plug them in, spend some time getting the older ones like, refurbished and make sure they're ready for sale, and then wait for the run up and dump it. And so I just have sort of anecdotal observations, but like, have you guys, observed that, or do you think that's a common practice that people are doing?
I'll let James speak to it more. I mean, I'm mostly running a podcast over here as opposed to actively mining, but I do see like people, it depends on the structure and depends on the company's model. So like the pubcos, I think, often get rid of their units and find different places to dispose them. The private miners, I feel like, depending on their size, they sometimes don't want to take on the capital risk of flipping units and, paying for a broker, paying for a freight to get out there, paying to go find new ASICs. And then also it's hard to time the market. So there's less flexibility, but that's the general sense I've picked up, but you guys would know more.
I think it certainly makes more sense to, buy the newer equipment, make sure your older equipment is going to get the highest possible value, like for that equipment that it can get, and getting it refurbed, getting it tested, making sure that because I mean, here's the thing. If you have a lot of equipment, right? Let's say you have like 100 machines and you're just like, I don't know, man, like we took them off the shelf because they were broken, right? Like they weren't really running. Like someone, they're going to say, well, in order to move all that gear at once with like unknown state, unknown status, right? And like, who knows why they were taken off? Like they're going to go for like 20 cents a terahash,
Yep.
right? And so, but if you like spend a little time in sorting them and consolidating them and rethermal pasting them and, doing some other processes that you can do to harden these machines, you can get 2, right? So you can get 10x, right, on the equipment for like a little bit of extra work. And so, now if you're a really big company and you're just like, don't care, man, like let's move the 100,000 ASICs. I don't know, right? Or if you're running a lifestyle public company and you're just getting paid like, buku bucks to, deploy more miners, right? And you don't really care about the old stuff, maybe, right?
Gotcha.
Or you're just like, hey, you know what? Let's go find a boneyard, site like Mero to throw them on a wind farm that has a 30% uptime.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's different strategies. And then there's the Venezuela joke that everyone likes to rerun. So, cool. Well, hey, I appreciate you both jumping on the pod to talk about this specific part of the ASIC market, Bitcoin mining market. Certainly really important, especially right now, I think, as we hopefully see a run-up in bull pricing. We will chat with you guys soon. If anyone wants to contact these gentlemen, you can find their information in the show notes. James, Will, thank you again.
Appreciate it. Thank you.